Welcome to Purpose 360. I'm Carol Cohn, and today more than ever before, companies, brands, and their partners need to stand for something beyond the bottom line. I've created this program to provide insights and ideas to share with you so that you can apply them to your work the very next day. The goal here is to up-level your purpose and to benefit companies and society. So please join us.
It's not very often that I invite an angel for a conversation, but we have a very special not-for-profit joining us called Vitamin Angels. They're an organization that aims to break the cycle of undernutrition by focusing on nutritionally vulnerable populations of young children and pregnant women. Today, we'll learn about a very sophisticated and very mission-driven not-for-profit, Vitamin Angels. We'll talk to their founder, Howard Schiffer, and his Associate Director of Sustainability, Chris Hortinela, and we will find out about how they have delivered hundreds of millions of vitamins to vulnerable populations in the United States and around the world. Research has shown if children receive optimal health and nutrition for the first 1,000 days, they often experience a trajectory of steady growth and development. Yet, unfortunately, millions of children around the world experience socioeconomic inequities that can create significant gaps in their health and nutrition during this critical window in their lives. Vitamin Angels, so appropriately named, is a global public health nutrition organization that promotes health and economic equity across the lifespan by ensuring nutritionally vulnerable, underserved young children and pregnant women have access to evidence-based nutrition interventions. So let's begin our conversation with Howard and Chris. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Oh, it's our pleasure. So, when we were just talking a little bit before we started, you talked about the evolution of how you see the field of purpose, that it's no longer about just transactional cause marketing, that it's a lot more than that. So let's just talk at a high level. How do you see the definition of purpose? And as well, I'd love to know a little bit more about your background.
Our fundraising model has always been a cause marketing model that has now evolved with Chris's help into corporate social responsibility, ESG, hitting the sustainable development goals. And what we've seen is that we used to only measure in terms of reach. In 2005, we were reaching 2 million women and children a year. Last year, we reached over 60 million women and children a year. But what has happened in the interim is that people now want to know, but what impact are you having? What difference are you making? And so our metrics and our measurements have had to continue to evolve as the nature of the marketplace has changed.
So echoing kind of what Howard said, what was a really big game changer for me as far as looking at the corporate partner landscape was kind of this role of institutional investors and their interest in ESG. So all of a sudden, we weren't just, wanting to communicate to the consumers of our corporate partners. Now, all of a sudden, we had these other stakeholders with a lot of different goals. So you had, these guys like BlackRock, you had their vendor and supplier audiences. And then you have, you started seeing that corporations started having sustainability councils that were third party and also their employees. And they each wanted something different on purpose. And it was amazing for us because we got to speak to things, to Howard's point, not just reach, but impact. What are we doing with advocacy, with behavioral change, with implementation research? And we were able to really make the partnership a lot stronger by showing our partners, yeah, we can definitely speak to all of these audiences. So that was, I think, a big game changer for us in the last, few years and moving forward.
Well, certainly, Howard, it was a wise decision to hire Chris. So let's pause and let's go back to a little bit of your history, Howard.
Yes.
You a little bit. What did you do before Vitamin Angels? And then what was that epiphany? What was that moment of sheer genius where you said, I've got to do more?
The long-term trajectory was in my early 20s, I was a lay midwife. I was part of the home birth movement. And I really got to understand the importance of prenatal nutrition. A lot of the women we were seeing were vegans and vegetarians. So that kind of embedded in me just this real understanding of just how essential basic nutrition was. When I realized I didn't want to be up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on call,
right.
I took the research I'd been doing and got into the natural products, the vitamin industry, which was still in its infancy at that time. I mean, there was not a Whole Foods that was around the country.
But you knew I bet you knew Bread and Circus.
There was Bread and Circus and
right?
Gooches,
Yep. Right, exactly.
Regional chains.
Mm-hmm.
And I got my grounding in that industry and really started to learn about marketing and about promotion and sales and creating products. After 14 years, it wasn't enough. It was a business, and it was not something that was just really filling me up anymore. A couple of things happened. One is I heard this quote from Mark Twain that said that the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you figure out why. And I thought, okay, that's important. And I think figuring out why, I think, is purpose. The other one was that a friend of mine, Gigi Coyle, told me about a writing class she had taken. And the prompt the night before was to write your own obituary. And I remember waking up the next day and thinking about that and just seeing a tombstone in front of me. It said, he sold a lot of products.
Oh, God. All right.
That's it. I've got to do something different. And I feel like I was led to Vitamin Angels, that every part of my life led me to think, oh, wait, I could do this. And then there was an earthquake in Southern California. And that was the opening of a relief agency called up the vitamin company I worked at. They needed vitamins for the children that they were reaching. And I helped get them vitamins. And that was the catalyst.
And that was the Northridge. That was that horrible earthquake.
That was 1994, the Northridge earthquake. And the group that called was a medical relief group. And initially I thought, well, they're handing out sutures and bandages and antibiotics. So of course they need vitamins. But what I came to realize was that everybody in this field, whether they were building houses or sending kids to school, everybody realized that nutrition was the foundation. And that without good nutrition, you could build all the schools you want, but the kids would not be able to learn. And nobody had a consistent and a reliable supply of vitamins. And all of a sudden, I thought, well, we can do that. And then somebody told me about vitamin A, that 2 doses a year could stop childhood blindness. And that was like, what? I couldn't believe that.
How did you create the name Vitamin Angels?
What I didn't realize, having been in the industry for 14 years, I was taking a handful of vitamins every day. My thought was that vitamins help you perform at your peak level or get sick less often. Or if you get sick, you'll get over it more quickly. When I started getting into this work and started meeting people like Al Summers, who had discovered vitamin A could prevent childhood blindness, and started reading more and more and more, I realized that vitamins actually were one of the most successful public health interventions in the past 50 years. That vitamin A alone has saved tens of millions of children's lives. And that was an epiphany. That was something that I had been involved in, but I thought, I never thought of it as a centerpiece of global health. And I think it's probably one of our biggest obstacles sometimes is that we say we're vitamin angels and people think, well, how important is that? Well, it's the difference between life and death often. So it's critical.
Talk about the geography and where you serve. And we'll ultimately get to your partnership model, which is extraordinary. But, people would say, oh, vitamins, we're all set in the developed world. But you're doing, my understanding is the developed and the developing world. So talk a little bit about how you pick countries, how do you pick need, how you began to structure this not-for-profit, because you weren't a not-for-profit guy, you were a commercial guy. And then you had this incredible, epiphany moment, and then you're radically changing to something that's deep into your soul.
I was a clueless guy. I mean, I often tell people,
okay.
I say that, that what you don't know can be your greatest ally.
Okay.
Because if I had known all that I needed to know to be successful, I would have thought, well, I just can't do it. But, obviously I just kept following things forward and luckily attracting really talented people like Chris and the people from Hopkins that are working in our program division that really did know, how to execute this program. But the way we pick out countries is wherever there's a need and wherever the need is not being filled through the primary healthcare system, we're interested. If you look at a map, I mean, it's actually all over the United States. There are food deserts. And obviously, I think COVID has highlighted that communities that are marginalized or people of color are the ones who are hit hardest in any kind of natural disaster or epidemic or civil strife, that they're the ones who are the most vulnerable. So we look at the UNICEF, the UN data, World Health data, and find the countries that have the highest rates of malnutrition, highest rates of vitamin A deficiency, highest rates of infant and maternal mortality, highest rates of stunting, which is they're too small for their age, or wasting, too thin for their age. All of those are indicators that there's a underlying chronic, long-term, often generational problem. And it manifests in a very simple way, is that kids and women, when they're pregnant, can die. I mean, childbirth can be a life-threatening event, and children under the age of 5 will die from something like an infection or diarrhea or a common cold. And it's because their immune systems are just so weak, which is, of course, one of the reasons vitamin A is so effective, is because it helps build the immune system.
You also have a big emphasis on deworming. So can you explain why that is important?
Deworming, what a lot of organizations have found out is that wherever there's poverty, chronic malnutrition, undernutrition, communities that are marginalized, hygiene and sanitation are often compromised. And people will use the outdoors or a field to go to the bathroom. There won't be hand washing facilities, and parasites, which can live in the soil, can easily get up into a child's body through their feet or through their hands. And when kids play in the dirt and they put their hands in their mouths, these tiny parasites that are really hard to see can get up, can go in, they lodge in the intestines, and a parasite can eat up to 30% of what the child takes in. So even if the child is eating, which oftentimes they're not, but even if they are, the parasite will take 30% of the nutrition, and parasites happen to love things like vitamin A.
Oh,
so
interesting.
Without antiparasitics deworming, you essentially take one step forward, 3 steps back. So they happen to combine very well with the vitamin A program because each of them is a 6-month regimen. So twice a year, you give the child deworming. You also give them the vitamin A, and you at least can make some progress.
So what is the total number of children and mothers that you have impacted since you started?
I haven't counted. I mean, it's last year. It was
billions, isn't it?
It's a lot. I mean, it's hundreds of millions, and it's in 70 countries all over the U.S. and Canada, the UK. So it's significant. I mean, we're having a big impact. I think what we're seeing is that governments can sometimes reach, and this is optimistic, up to 70% of the need in a country. But that remaining 30% are usually the most vulnerable. And that's, the people who are the poorest, the people who are living at the border regions, people who are not part of the primary healthcare system, whose kids maybe don't have access to medical help or go to school. That's where we want to reach. And it's more difficult to reach them because they're not always located in major cities, and they're harder to get to. And there isn't a mechanism already in place, like a health fair that a government might have a couple times a year in regions. It probably doesn't exist for this population. And so that's where we want to be. We want to find the local partners that can help us reach that know the language, that know the people, that know the customs, that have relationships, that oftentimes grew up in these villages, that they can help us reach those communities so we can get to the people most in need.
So Chris, why, I don't know who found who. Did Howard find you? Did you find Howard? But obviously, once you started diving into the story, it must have touched you deeply. So can you talk about, why did you join the organization? And, Howard's very humble about the breadth and the structure. And so how did you two get along to look into the future and say, we need to be more sophisticated in terms of this isn't just cause marketing. This is something that is having profound impacts in economies and futures and dreams. So first, why did you join? What did you see in the organization? And then how did the two of you get in sync to really evolve to the high level of sophistication you have today?
My backstory is not as interesting as Howard's, but I will say that from a very young age, I'm a child of immigrant parents, right? So my father would have been one of our beneficiaries. It was textbook. He had siblings that did not make it past the first year of life due to what we think was undernutrition, all of these conditions that we're seeing. So from a very young age, I was very aware of that. And I always wanted to work, for something, like the UN or one of these organizations that would address these issues. So my schooling and my academia was very grounded in international development, globalization studies. And then I actually, after grad school, I got an internship at the UN. Moved to Geneva, the whole thing. It was not for me. I realized I needed something a little bit more on the ground, a little more hands-on. And that's kind of by chance when I found Vitamin Angels, and I looked at their mission, and it was so focused to me, and it really made sense. And on just from an intellectual and from a challenge perspective for me was I've always looked at the private sector and seen how powerful it was, for good and for bad. And I've always wanted to come up with solutions on how do we harness that immense power of the private sector to solve some of these problems. And I think, Vitamin Angels has been instrumental in supporting me through that. Even in the infancy, we've been kind of working on our sustainability platform for the past 3 or 4 years. And they've really allowed me to grow and to explore that area and to come up with, solutions and to talk with, the private sector on like, how do we really push this forward? And it's just so, it's very satisfying for me that I can kind of go to a partner who I know is committed to helping moms and children wherever they may be, out of kind of the goodness of their humanity, but also be able to take that out and say, let's move that to the side. And I can give you 10 really strong business reasons why this makes sense, right? And again, when you have all these new players coming in, you have the SDGs that provide this universal framework. If you're talking to a long-term institutional investor that is managing pension funds, 30, 40 years into the future, and they're investing in emerging markets. And you can relate to them what impact getting nutrition to children under 5 does to the national GDP. All of a sudden their ears perk up, because then that makes sense.
Let's take a break and talk about the numbers. You always know that in my show, I like to give numbers, and here are some of the numbers from Vitamin Angels. In 2020, they will reach nearly 70 million nutritionally vulnerable pregnant women and children in over 70 countries around the globe. And how the organization ensures such a widespread access on a global scale is what makes the group so unique. Another number. They draw on active partnerships with over 2,500 NGOs and government and entities globally. Their model is scalable and adaptable distribution that leverages the infrastructure and expertise of local stakeholders to effectively implement its nutrition interventions. Through this model, Vitamin Angels is able to provide healthcare professionals and community healthcare workers around the world with the opportunity to expand their repertoire of health services to include the vitally important vitamin A, as well as deworming medications, as well as other vitamins that provide supplementary nutrition and feeding. Let's talk about partnerships, because you have a fascinating model. You have partners, and it seems like they're far more than just funders. And I think that the Walgreens Boots Alliance is one. It's a great, you have many, but that's one. I believe they're your largest. And everybody knows Walgreens. They don't know Boots as much. But can you talk about how it came about? What is their role? And you've had that partnership since 2013. So how do you keep it fresh? Because probably there's changes in management, so that you've got, you don't just have one champion, which is not a good idea when, you've got such a large partner.
What I realized early on was that they were all in. I mean, they were serious, and it wasn't the marketing piece of it was one piece, but they really cared. And it was not just the executive team, but we started doing engagement programs for the team members, for the employees, and there are tens of thousands around the world. We did one where it was called Message in a Bottle, where we had this bottle-shaped card, and we had stories from different children, some in the U.S., some around the world, that we sent one to each store, 8,000 stores. And each store got a child that they got to write cards to those children. Well, and we said, write a card, and we will, when we go into the field, we'll distribute them. We got like 20,000 cards. I mean, we had stacks in the offices, and the card, it wasn't just like get well, it was like these, beautiful drawings and long messages about, there was such sincerity about how much these people cared for the kids, that it was just, it hit me. I mean, it was this one of our biggest donors, Kirk Humanitarian, that donates a lot of prenatals to us, was going on a trip when he first started working with us to Haiti. They were going on a mission trip. They had to get passport photos. So they went into their Walgreens outside of Salt Lake City to get passport photos. And the woman behind the counter said, "Oh, this is, where are you going?" And he said, "We're going to Haiti." And she said, "Oh, you're going on vacation? That's going to be so much fun." And Spencer said, no, we're going to help children out, women and children. We're doing a mission trip. And she said, "Wait a second." She runs to the back, grabs that big photo of the child that her store has received, and says, "You have to look at this. Look, we're helping this child, and this company really is making a difference, and we're really helping this." I mean, it was so deep. That's what I saw. I think and it was the same thing with SmartyPants, is that where we've had our biggest success is where all levels within an organization really are allowed to see what we're doing and get it and really get engaged. And boy, the impact is just tremendous.
So let me flip over to you, Chris, which is that as you are looking at basically a ecosystem of engagement and specifically against objectives, if I can ask, the Walgreens relationship is going great. You're coming in, but you probably said, maybe I can even enhance it a little bit more. So can you talk a little bit about that without telling too many secrets?
Sure. And really credit to their team because, the Walgreens, CSR side, they really latched on to the SDGs right away. And that's a huge help for us because right away that signals that, look, they're speaking our language. And it really allows a lot more flexibility as far as our programs and, how we are impacting women and children around the world. And again, it helps them communicate to a larger audience. And it's really, it's going to sound like a broken record here, but it's really being able to speak to all of their different audiences, to their vendors, to their employees that Howard talked about. The investors are always asking for more data. Every year you see, look at the corporations, their sustainability reports are getting larger and larger with more reporting frameworks, right? But at the same time, it allows us to communicate more of what we're doing outside of just the reach, because there's a lot there, right? And even this past year, I think one thing that was really great about highlighting our work and being able to get kind of a larger communication platform was why some of these areas that we're working experience undernutrition. And you can see that, there's lots of places like, my background right now is of Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. That is a population of indigenous Mayans. And they have experienced horrible discrimination. And it really goes to show that discrimination and racism have real world impacts, especially on nutrition. And we're able to tell that story now in much more impactful way.
So I want to touch upon storytelling.
Yeah.
Because when we are working and creating partnerships between our corporate clients or brands and not-for-profits, everybody, yes, the numbers, we've touched this many, impacted, but we want that story. And so what insights can you give? Because how many employees are at Vitamin Angels? You don't have like thousands. You have how many?
No. I think right now with the new hires, we're going to be at 48, I think, domestically, and then another 25 internationally. So in the high 70s.
Okay, but so you have enough, but you're not overwhelming in terms of numbers.
No, we're small.
You're small and you're mighty. So how do you mine for those stories? That's my first question. And the second question is, you have other partners. You have SmartyPants, you have Vitamin Shop, you have Walgreens and others. So you've got to give different stories to different ones. And so this is like a cosmic conundrum for not-for-profits and their partners. And so any insights that you can share about how you find them? Do you photograph them? Do you write them? I love the story about the picture of one child going to a store. But any insights would be greatly appreciated by our listeners.
It's never one size fits all for Vitamin Angels. I think that's really been our success, is that when we get into a corporate partnership, the first thing we do is not to show them, this is what we have. You can choose one from column A and one from column B. Is we listen, and we listen a lot. We really try to hear, what are your goals? What are your objectives? What are the challenges you're facing right now? What does the competition look like? Where do you want to be in the next year, in the next 3 years, the next 5 years? And really try to zero in on what their key, metrics, their parameters are that are going to really start to move the dial. And then start to craft a program. And I think one of the things that's nice about being a small organization is that we're nimble, is that we don't have a lot of layers of bureaucracy. We can move really quickly. We're very responsive. And so we can get things done. And we have small enough group that we can work effectively between the development folks that are interfacing with the corporate partner, the programs team that are doing the work, and then the marketing group that are collecting the content, and that every partner is going to need not only different stories, but different mediums to get the stories out. And so is it going to be signage? Is it going to be a employee engagement program? Is it going to be videos from the field? Is it going to be bringing some of their key people into the field, or doing virtual trips to the field for their entire team? Every partnership looks really different. And I think the effectiveness of the stories are moving because they're real and they're alive. Everybody at Vitamin Angels, whether you're in corporate services, IT, marketing, programs development, wherever you are, everybody goes out into the field, every single person. And that, I don't know of any other organization that does that. But what happens is that the work is really alive. I mean, that when people talk, they've met the women and children they know, and they have their own story, like Chris told about his story, to share that they understand how critical this is. Marina, who did a lot of storytelling with our domestic program in the last year, she went to these different pregnancy resource centers, and she was talking to the women who ran those, and she, at the end of it, she was just in tears, and she told a woman that her parents were people that got this type of program. I mean, that's how she's able to be healthy today. And so it's very much alive. And I think our success has been being able to transfer that emotionality to our partners, and that they know it's authentic and they know it's real. And Chris, I'm sure will want to add others details to that.
Kind of building on what Howard said and going back to audiences, I also think, because we work in so many different places, we work in 70, countries, over 70 countries around the world, and we're also doing things outside of just giving our interventions, is some partners want to know what we're doing on the policy change and advocacy side. That's a very different story. What are we doing with academia to understand behavior? And what can we do as far as behavior research to understand why are these communities experiencing undernutrition? Those two are very different stories than an individual story of a mother and a child. And I will say, to credit our marketing team and just our organization, is one of the first things that I experienced when I joined Vitamin Angels was we actually created a document called the Protecting Beneficiaries' Rights document. So whenever we take stories or go into these communities to learn about any individuals, we have a very strict code as far as protecting these people and making sure that comes first, because a lot of them are from vulnerable populations, and our partners have been really great and receptive to that as well. So I just wanted to mention that as far as that these are real people and there's real consequences to telling their stories, and most of them are very happy to share with us. Howard has a great line where he says, "Your guys' stories help make sure that we can not just keep providing help to you, but to other women and children like you around the world."
And I think that, Howard, you touched on a really critical point that we see in not-for-profits, which is that you talked about marketing and then programmatic, and then you talked about the third area, which I'm totally blanking out on, which is the third area, development, fundraising, of course, development. We got to get those funds, all working together.
Yes.
And when we see a well-functioning public-private partnerships working together, getting great impacts, it's because they've worked together versus being in silos. And so kudos to you for having the intuition to do that right. And then this whole idea of, I think that Chris's point of view of being sophisticated, and you've said this many times, we listen. We find out what are their goals, who do they want to impact? How do they want to move forward? And listening is so critical so we always talk about goals, your goals, our goals, and shared goals. And so you're doing things extraordinarily well. And so congratulations. Let's talk about your service model, which is that you have, I believe, over, is it 2,000? 2,500 partners now. And so to get your vitamins, right, and educational information and such, nutritional information, to that ground level, to that one-to-one person. So how do you pick these partners? And they're all over the world. So let's talk about some insights to your distribution model.
After you do something, people go, "Oh, that was genius. That was so smart." But at the time, it was honestly just we were broke. We didn't have any money, and so we couldn't build international. Now we have teams in a lot of our priority countries, but initially we didn't. And we had to find partners that were aligned with us and what our values were, that had a presence in the country, that had their own infrastructure, so that we couldn't support them. And what we said was, look, we'll identify the need. We know there's a need for nutrition. We'll give you the technical support. We'll give you the training. We'll help oversee the program. And all we need you to do, not all, but we'll ship to the port of entry. You need to pick it up, clear customs, warehouse it. We'll give you guidelines for warehousing. And then you need to be in the villages doing the distributions. And what that did was that there's two key things when you're doing this work that you're always up against. One is the program scalable? And is it sustainable? And that model happened to be a very scalable program because it was easy and word spread. Initially, we were looking for partners and getting our word out on the internet. Now we have partners coming to us every week from all over the world saying, and then word spreads very quickly in these countries that people see, where'd you get those? You're doing nutrition programs. So it allowed us to scale. And then because a lot of the costs were being borne by the in-country partner, it was very sustainable. It wasn't just us having to pay all these additional salaries and transportation costs and distribution costs. We had a partner that was bearing a lot of that weight. So those were the two factors. And I think, fortunately, as I mentioned earlier on, everybody that's in this work, whether you're building schools or digging wells or helping to build homes for people, everybody realizes, or even doing medical work, everybody realizes that nutrition is key. That you've got to, that even if you're giving out antiretroviral drugs, if you do not have a nutrition program, they're not going to be as effective.
Let's take a break and find out what else is happening besides this podcast that you may want to know about. Goldman Sachs has launched a new initiative called 1 Million Black Women. This builds on the company's decades-long commitments to their 10,000 women's initiatives overseas, their 10,000 small businesses in the United States, and now this significant initiative that will commit $10 billion in direct investment capital and $100 million in philanthropic support to address the dual, disproportionate gender and racial biases that Black women have faced for generations, which have only been exacerbated by the pandemic. 1 million Black women will comprise investments focused on key moments in Black women's lives, from early childhood through retirement. These investment areas include healthcare, education, housing, and small businesses, all aimed at narrowing the opportunity gaps and positively impacting the lives of at least 1 million Black women. For further information, please go to goldmansachs.com/our commitments. Now let's return to our conversation with Howard and Chris about Vitamin Angels. So let's shift a little bit to COVID, because COVID, it's unfortunately, it is touched everyone around the globe. It certainly has impacted. You can't have face-to-face volunteering, virtual volunteering and such. It's probably impacted your distribution system. So what were the challenges for you? And I'm sure you came up with, since you're very adept, that you were very nimble to get around it.
We were lucky in that our supply chains were not that disrupted. What was hard with COVID was that our communities were hit really hard and are continuing to be hit really hard. I was talking to Dr. Mulama Diese in Democratic Republic of Congo a few weeks ago, and I asked if there was any light on the horizon as far as getting vaccines into DRC. And he looked at me and he said, Howard, he said, right now, they're saying at the earliest, it will be July. And I said, he said, Howard, it's probably not going to be until 22, 23, or 24, really, to get the country. He said in July, he said the number of vaccines that are ordered right now for a country of 90 million people is 50,000. So we know this is going to be a continuing problem. We know that our communities are impacted. We've had to obviously pivot as far as working around lockdowns, seeing who could distribute, who could not distribute, getting information out on best practices, on how to make sure that our people were being protected and that we were protecting the beneficiaries. So there was a lot of e-learning, a lot of training that went on to make sure that when we can and when we could do distributions, they were done effectively and that we're not adding to the problem. In fact, we're helping the problem right now.
And Chris, did any of your areas evolve because of COVID?
I think Howard pretty much covered most of it, but I will say one thing I've heard anecdotally as far as the impact was that a lot of the women, and this is from a pregnancy clinic in the US, was one of the field partners related that, at a lot of these pregnancy centers, these women don't have a lot of support. And going to the pregnancy center physically was kind of one of the biggest kind of emotional areas of support for them. So that has been an impact. And luckily, I think because of our partnership models, all of our partners have really stepped up, and nobody, and correct me if I'm wrong, Howard, nobody has said, look, this is a tough time. We're gonna, we can't provide the support that you need. I think everyone has either maintained or has increased.
Yeah, no, the support has been amazing. And
support has been amazing. Yeah.
And the need has actually increased in multiple ways because not only were food chains disrupted, which of course has a big impact, but people's economic well-being. I mean, jobs were lost, salaries were cut. And so people were having to make less nutritious food buying decisions. And then countries that had health programs like vaccines for measles, as an example, were either disrupted or canceled. Anytime there's a cancellation in measles vaccines and the coverage goes below 90%, one of the recommendations is to increase coverage of vitamin A, again, because vitamin A helps build immunity. So all of a sudden, in addition to our partners saying we need more product, we were getting state governments saying we need help. And again, we have an advantage because most of our funding, because it comes from the private sector, it's not restricted. Most other charities, many, will have like 90% or 91% of their funding be restricted, meaning that where that funding goes, how it's used is very clearly defined. Vitamin Angels has this very unique advantage in that our program division can say, look, there's a major outbreak here. We've got to get more vitamin A. We could just make the decision, again, without a lot of bureaucracy, to get that product where it's needed very, very quickly. And so with COVID, fortunately, we were able to do that and really start to have an impact in those areas that were really getting hit. And then we were able to put more resources into our own country to say, look, we need to increase the reach for communities that have been marginalized. And so we're able to identify people in some major areas to help us get out into the communities to say, who can help us reach these people?
What do consumers think of Vitamin Angels?
From everything I've heard, they love it. I mean, it's less Vitamin Angels, and I think it's almost more because our main audience is reaching them through our corporate partners. It's great for consumers to see that our partners are putting their money where their mouth is and really putting purpose first. And we've seen that work out really well, not just for on the consumer end, but also, we've had companies get bought out by larger corporations and have said, your purpose has really shined through. And we know that it resonates with your consumer audience based on, reviews on Amazon, for example. You can go on SmartyPants' Amazon page and look what people are saying. And SmartyPants has done an amazing job of building their partnership with Vitamin Angels kind of in from day one. When they started the company, they said, I want purpose to be part of this. And that has really gone through.
And they said for every time you buy SmartyPants vitamins, you're going to help a child or you're going to help a woman. Well, for a pregnant woman, if she knows that her getting her vitamins is also going to be helping a woman or a child in the US or around the world, that resonates. That has an impact on people. We've seen it time and time again when people, move around to different corporations, and inevitably they'll take Vitamin Angels program to their new business and say, we got to be doing this. We've got to be, reaching our people with something more than just a product. We have to be telling more of a story about who we are and what we care about. And, besides the connection with humanity, which is, of course, important, Vitamin Angels is a proof positive that vitamins work. That vitamins are essential and that they're critical. And I think a lot of times in our own country, people think of vitamins as a nice to have or, okay, maybe it'll help. But getting to say that vitamins save lives, that if you give a woman a multiple prenatal, a woman who's anemic, at 6 months, it could lower mortality rate by up to 29%. That gets people's attention. Like, wow. And that's all it takes? Yeah, that's all it takes.
And it sounds like, Chris, as you said that, and Howard, that you said that you went from reach to impact. And so saving those lives, that's one indicator. What are some of the other impact numbers, either, or qualitative measures that you can share, that you share with your partners?
Well, with vitamin A, the research has been done by Al Summers and Hopkins, is that vitamin A, again, 2 doses a year, can lower mortality rates for children under 5 by 24%. And again, our cost on that for the vitamin A, the deworming that you mentioned, the distribution, the transportation, the whole thing, A to Z, 25 cents. So that's a big impact.
That's a
low cost. With the multiple prenatal, our cost is about $5 to reach a woman. Now think about how much food you'd have to provide a woman, for a pregnancy, but getting that bottle of multiple prenatals, which you could put in a fanny pack and take anywhere in the world, is that product, again, for women who are anemic, 29% reduction in infant mortality at 6 months, 12% reduction in small for gestational age babies, or 10% reduction in low birth weight babies. Those are indicators of how healthy a baby is going to be, and even if a baby is going to survive, and a 9% decrease in stillborn births. And again, when you look at these numbers, and Chris mentioned about the economic impact that's been studied. People will say it's a 17 times return, for vitamins, and it's, there's probably been more research done on some of these nutrition interventions than almost any other intervention. There's a tremendous body of work shows that get these vitamins to the right person. In the 2004, 8, and 12, the Copenhagen Consensus was convened by the World Bank. Their job, these are economists, so their job is tell governments where they should put their money so they can have the greatest impact, right? If you're facing AIDS, malaria, TB, where do you start? Every time they came up with a list of 30 recommendations, number one on the list every time, vitamins.
That's great. That's great. Well, this has been an amazing conversation, and we're unfortunately getting to the bottom of the show, but I always like to give you the last word. But I want to ask a question for our listeners. So Howard, you're going to get two, and Chris, you get two. What are two of the most important takeaways for a listener? Now, a listener can be a corporate, or the listener can be a not-for-profit. So I'll let you decide what you want to, those pearls of wisdom. You've given a lot, obviously, during this conversation. But what are two of the most important, Howard, and then two of the most important, Chris? And then I'm going to let you have your last word.
Mine, I would say, life is short. Life is short, and we don't have that many opportunities to really make a difference. And I think this is one of those opportunities that doesn't take a lot, and it has a big impact. And I think whatever else we're doing, whatever else purpose is about, in my mind, it's about serving and about reaching other human beings in the world. And I think we happen to have landed on something that's pretty simple. I mean, there are no moving parts in a vitamin, it's low technology at its best, but that has a gigantic impact. Everything, that's what I see is I go into these villages, these women, and I'll ask them to testify, and they'll get up and they'll say, you would look at me, before my last pregnancy, I couldn't get up off the bed. I was sleeping while I was tired. I couldn't even help my family. Now I'm strong. I mean, it makes such a gigantic, and it's like that difference is hope.
That difference is hope. I love it. Okay, Chris.
So I'll do one for the private sector and I'll do one for the non-profit. So on the corporate side, I will say spend the time to really understand your nonprofit partners. Understand not just what they do, but how they're doing it. The partnerships that have worked out the best for us are some of the partners that really get our work. And I'm seeing this more and more as I'm seeing a lot of corporations hire people that have come out of nonprofits or from the government side that can help articulate what we're doing in sustainability. The piece for the nonprofit side would kind of be what I touched on earlier, is really define those business goals, right? So I think the humanity piece is wonderful. We work with a lot of great people, but if you have a very strong business strategy, the partnership can weather much more. If the entire C-suite gets replaced or leaves or anything, as long as you can keep putting forth that proven strategy, then I think you're solid.
So, Howard, earlier in the beginning, you talked about, I asked about the eureka for this idea. And you said, I was supposed to write my obituary and it was going to say like, he sold a lot of products. Now, we don't want you to die, for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And with all the vitamins you have in you, you'll probably last forever. So that's a good thing. But what do you wish that they would say in your obituary now?
He tried. I mean, I think I would say that, that whatever I put out, I have gotten back tenfold. I would invite other people to join us, because whatever you give, it's such a gift to be able to kind of do this work and to be welcomed into these homes with people who have very little, but who just are so happy that somebody cares. And I think for human beings, for us to be able to care for each other, that to me is if I was at a small village in Rio Grande in Peru, and Maria, we listened to her for the whole time. At the end, I said, do you have anything to ask us? And she said, yes. How long did it take you to get here? And I thought about it. I thought, well, it was 10 hours on the plane and then 2 hours on the truck and then a half hour walking up to the village. And I said, wow, about 12 hours. And she stopped and she said, wow, you must really love us. And that to me is like, that's okay. I'm going good for another 10 years. It's like, I just, these people are so worth it. And it's such a gift to be able to be in community with them.
And Chris, any last words?
for the, to answer the same question, I won't be as humble as Howard, but it would be nice if it said, he saved a lot of babies while he was alive. That would be great.
Okay, that's super. So I want to thank both of you. This was just a wonderful conversation. Howard Schiffer and Chris Hortinela, Vitamin Angels. There's a lot to learn here for the bigger not-for-profits, for smaller, for those of you who want to sell more or do more than just sell stuff, which I love that. And that you're having a great impact. And I also just want to remind our listeners, this is not just in the developing world. This is also here in our United States of America and in Canada and in the UK and such. So that the fact that that you've also taken a very strong business approach. And I think, again, hey, Chris, next time you get your review, ask them for a raise because you're doing a great job. I think that it's a wonderful organization. I've learned a lot more about it. And you are answering, I always end with the question, what is your purpose? But I have now evolved that. We're going to our third season. And so I will ask our listeners this question. What is the power of your purpose? Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Chris. And keep up the wonderful, wonderful work.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you.